Well, it would seem European farmers are once again under attack by their government, except this time it's not in the Netherlands, it's not in France, and it's not in Germany. Now it's in the United Kingdom. And what we can see is if this is to mirror the standards of what we've seen in the past with government controlling the food supply and persecuting farmers, then what this will lead to is nothing more than starvation, devastation, and destruction of the society of the United Kingdom as a whole. But of course, those within positions of power akin to Keir Starmer, who do nothing more than effectively the bidding of institutions like BlackRock, will gladly sacrifice the average individual, the average working man, and the average farmer of the United Kingdom, all at the behest of doing whatever it is those who pull his marionette strings desire. Now let's jump in and see what we've got with the utter insanity of this inheritance tax that is now being thrust upon farmers in the United Kingdom. Starting off here with this article from The Guardian, for but a moment we see farmers have hoarded land for too long. Inheritance tax will bring new life to rural Britain. What in the fucking soft communism is going on in the United Kingdom? Stalin just seized the farms with force, but it appears they're trying to do so subversively. Prices and rents will fall under Rachel Reeves' plan, enabling a younger generation with new ideas to enter the field. Okay, let's address something specifically when it comes to how younger generations get into farming. It's because their families have done so for generations and many of the times for hundreds of years, which is exactly why they're so intrinsically linked into this. And because of that fact, because it is their family legacy, they will do the same and their children will follow in their footsteps. But as we see, this is something that is being completely punted away and never addressed by people like Rachel Reeves that are trying to do nothing more than claim we'll just have a new young generation of farmers to come forward. Except you do not have people deviating from the norms of standard society into the grueling and backbreaking labor of the 80 to 100-hour weeks that farmers have to work, and many of the times making less than minimum wage. But of course, you see, that's not something that's addressed by people like Rachel Reeves and her ilk. No, they just claim that this will be good for the next generation, meanwhile, completely avoiding the fact of how this is subversively good for corporations and government, because that is who in the end will own the farmland. Moving on now, here we see. Rachel Reeves tells furious farmers it is fair that they pay higher death taxes on their land. Don't get me started on inheritance tax and how it's criminal on the fact that if someone is to slave away for their entire life just because they keel over and die, the government thinks that they're then owed some portion of what it is that they've been saving to give their loved ones so they can hopefully give sustainability to those after they've passed. But no, of course, that's not how the state sees it. The state sees it as whatever resource you have in your pocket, they demand their fair share. Jumping in, we see Rachel Reeves has slapped down farmers furious at budget plans to hike inheritance tax on agricultural land, saying it is a fair way of raising money. It is not. The Chancellor defended her decision to reform the way death taxes affect farms amid fury from the industry and a high profile of celebrities like Jeremy Clarkson and Kirstie Allsopp. From April 2026, inheritance tax will be levied at an effective rate of 20% on the value of businesses and agricultural assets over $1 million in a shakeup of agricultural property relief. Okay, so let's go ahead and address this specifically. It's levied at an effective rate of 20%, and that 20% will be growing each year, as is stated by Rachel Reeves. So we'll see that it will only continue to increase the burden. And not only that, we see £1 million or €1 million specifically being the factor of the threshold that is achieved for these farms to then be taxed. But here's the deal. If you're someone who owns land, you have livestock, you have multiple different sets of resources to take care of those animals, and on top of that, you have your home on your property, you have all of the different tools that you need to make sure that you can properly take care of your animals and whatever farm equipment to take care of your land, all of these things usually without fail end up totaling past £1 million, and because of this, that means almost all of these family farms that they claim are not going to be affected are going to be capsized by something like this 20% value increase. Here we see Previously, farmers' families could claim up to 100% APR on the agricultural value of the land that they owned with no threshold. Campaigners have warned that the decision will affect almost all family farms, slamming the government for breaking clear promises to protect the industry. Miss Alsop was the most outspoken, accusing Miss Reeves of having fucked all farmers and destroying their ability to pass farms on to their children, which is the desired end goal. As we see many of the times when you see experts come forward or anyone claiming that there's going to be a litany of negative downstream effects from a certain action taken, when you end up looking at the espoused end goals of what government or the establishment desires in general, it appears that usually those negative downstream effects in many ways are subversively the desired end goal itself. Quite interesting that, and something for you to consider, why you do not need government and corporations owning the land with which your food comes from. Meanwhile, Tory MPs warned that it would damage UK food security and hinder efforts to make farming more environmentally friendly, which is absolutely true. But the Chancellor last night insisted that almost 3/4 of farms would be unaffected, and said farmers were getting a far better deal than everyone else paying IHT at the full 40% rate. We've got to raise money. I feel we've done that in a fair and balanced way. 73% of farmers won't be paying a single penny more in inheritance tax, and then every single time Rachel Reeves has been pressed on this to explain that further, she doesn't actually detail this in totality and how it is that 73% of farmers will actually not be affected by this, because like I already told you, when you amalgamate all of the different resources that these farms have, it ends up totaling out past €1 million almost every single time. And because of this, well, we see that all of these small family farms are going to be affected. Jumping in a little further, we see the National Farmers Union predicts the change will snatch away the next generation's ability to carry on producing British food and could lead to higher prices, which, as I've stated, with someone like Keir Starmer simping for institutions like BlackRock bending the knee and licking their boot, well, when we also see that Ukraine being the breadbasket of the entire Eastern world when it comes to the fact of the grains that are produced, and on top of that, with BlackRock's investment in Ukrainian farmland and the country itself for restructuring and rebuilding, we could understand what we very well may see with, I don't know, the shifting dynamic of UK food, and then very well where it may be coming from an institution and a country that has been hollowed out like BlackRock. Here we see the Country and Land Business Association said the move from April 2026 would hit 70,000 farms, calling it nothing short of a betrayal, which would jeopardize the future of rural businesses. Ms. Alsop said the Chancellor had fucked all farmers, she has destroyed their ability to pass farms on to their children, and broken the future of all of our greatest estates. It is an appalling decision which shows the government has zero understanding of what matters to rural voters. And actually, no, they do understand, but they do not care, because when they see rural voters, what they see is, well, there's 5 people that live on this massive stretch of property and only 3 of them can vote. So realistically, fuck those 3 people. That is how they view this. Now back to it, we see while Mr. Clarkson, who show Clarkson's Farm, follows his efforts to run a 1,000-acre farm in the Cotswolds, posted on X, "Farmers, I know that you've been shafted today, but please don't despair. Just look after yourselves for 5 short years and this shower will be gone." But Downing Street is confident that changes to inheritance tax on farms will not affect food security and insisted there was an adequate financial support available to farmers. Asked if ministers were confident the changes would not hurt food security, a Number 10 spokesman this morning said, "Yes, we are committed to supporting farmers. There's an increase in the agricultural budget. There's an increase in the environmental schemes that support sustainable farming and food production." So, what we take away from that specifically would be an understanding of what it means when they're talking about an increase in the agricultural budget. Because something that's actually quite fascinating about that is when you actually listen to the farmers in the UK talking about this when they're at the Reform UK meetings or when they're speaking to these massive protests that are outside Downing Street, what do we understand from this? That the UK government is in fact actually subsidizing many of these farmers not to produce goods and let them sit in the ground and rot. And that is something that we should consider quite interesting, because I thought it was something that the UK government was stating, and many of these different experts, that there was going to be no food insecurity, but what we see is the food that's being produced within the United Kingdom for so many of these people to consume and produce sustainability for themselves so they can have energy and nourishment, not only for themselves, but for their children. Well, it seems that that food's now not even being picked out of the ground, and the government is paying the farmers to abandon their duty as they have been doing for generations, and they're claiming there's going to be no negative side effects. But you don't have to take it from me. Why don't you go ahead and listen to this farmer speaking at a Reform UK meeting and make up your own mind.
The next thing I'm going to tell you is unreal, because now we've been offered £2,500 to join a scheme for 3 years, and we don't supply you any food. Now listen to that.
We're going to go hungry.
I am going to plough a field. I'm going to put spring barley in. I'm going to get £440 off the government per acre, okay? That when it comes to crop size, leave it rot in the ground. So I don't get no straw for the cattle. You don't get nothing for your bread, for everything we make, okay? But I can also plant bee mix, which is for birds and bees. I can plant wild bird seed, which is for wild birds. I can also be paid to buy a ton of wild bird seed like anybody puts in their garden for the birds and drill it out on the ground once a week. I can get paid for that. Now my accountant says, do it. Because in doing that, I've not got to buy fertiliser, which since the Ukraine war, it's gone from £250 an acre to £1,000 a tonne. So in order to fertilise your food, I've got to buy fertiliser at £1,000 a tonne. It's come down a little bit and sometimes, and it goes up a little bit. But that's basically where we are. So I've now got a crop that I don't have to spray. I don't have to send nobody out there with a tractor. I don't have to fertilise it. So I can just leave it in the ground and let it roll. And pick up my £440 an acre and go all over it again. And the government is giving me £2,500 for the next 3 years to do that.
Wow.
And I'm not the only one.
Yeah, why?
The fact that the UK government is subsidizing these farmers to leave their crops in the ground to wither away, rot, and die rather than be pulled, used, and consumed by the populace of the United Kingdom is truly the most absurd thing you could imagine. But of course, you see, they're not operating on standards that any normal person would deem as something that you could create prosperity from. What they're trying to do is reassert the dynamics of power and control within the United Kingdom itself, which, as we understand, with farmers having an outsized bit of control because of their ability to, I don't know, control the food supply, government wanting to subversively manipulate that and shift those reins into their own hands, we can understand why it is that something like this is happening. And it's genuinely insane, especially when you consider the standards of what we heard with things like bird feed and bird seed being tossed out everywhere, and then you correlate this with the understanding of what the government is saying with how we're subsidizing more environmentally friendly standards for farmers to operate under, and then you realize it's quite literally just programs like that. But alas, of course, you don't actually hear anything getting broken down like that by people within the UK government, because that would require them to actually deliver you nuance, and upon doing so, you would realize the standards they're delivering to you are nothing more than bullshit. So now back to the utter insanity of what we see going on. Here we see not only are the UK government subsidizing these farmers not to do their job, but they're also subsidizing foreign farms, even more so than that of the United Kingdom's constituents itself. Here we see, posted to Twitter from UKIP, Labour is spending $536 million to fund foreign farms, while their tax rate on British farms is estimated to bring in $520 million. Labour are destroying our farms to fund foreigners. Starmer is the definition of a traitor. And I absolutely agree with that, but one thing I don't agree with is the way this is being couched and phrased by many within the UK, because they keep claiming that this is a tax rate on the British farmer. But no, this is a land grab by the British government. And once people come to grips with this, they will be able to understand what this represents in totality, which is nothing more than the evolution of soft communism in our society. So now let's go ahead and jump in and see what we've got going on with apparently 100,000 people are now in protest signing petitions standing against these ideals that are being espoused by people like Keir Starmer and his ilk. And now here you see that petition, or at least the reasoning behind it, and this is on petition.parliament.uk. Don't change inheritance tax relief for working farms. We think that changing inheritance tax relief for agricultural land will devastate farms nationwide, forcing families to sell land and assets just to stay on their property. We urge the government to keep the current exemptions for working farms. And as I have already stated, with the misconception of what we see represented here with how this is perceived by the public within the United Kingdom, this is not simply a tax raid on UK farmers, this is a land grab by the UK government. And when we see the fact that this will openly devastate farms nationwide, meaning family farms, which will force these people to sell off their assets, that is exactly the desired end goal of massive institutions like BlackRock and the UK government that desire to see government and corporate control over these farms. Here we see moving on. We feel that passing farms through generations is essential to UK farming. Until now, inheritance tax exemptions have made that possible by allowing farmland to pass without taxation. We think that changes to inheritance tax will harm UK farming deeply, with some farmers predicting their families will be forced out within just 2 generations. We think the government is framing the policy around the targeting of rich landowners, but we believe this policy will affect farming families of all sizes. And then we go down and we actually look at the numbers from the petition itself. We can see that it has reached over 115,000 signatures and climbing. Parliament will consider this for debate at 100,000 signatures, meaning we have already officially reached that threshold for this to be a conversation within the UK Parliament. And my goodness, does it need to be one, but it also needs to be a conversation that is being had on the streets of the United Kingdom, and it appears that that is something that very well may be happening as we see farmers very well may be beginning to boogaloo. As we see here from the New York Times, UK farmers protest in London over inheritance tax change. Farmers worth more than 1.3 million will face an estate tax from 2026, ending a previous exemption and prompting anger in some rural communities. Just for but a moment, I would like to focus on this piece that I've highlighted here from this article from the New York Times, and then we will move on and close this out. And it is something that I thought was truly remarkable because of the nature of the lie that it represents, because it is so glaringly, obviously bullshit if you do any bit of research. But of course, that doesn't matter because the New York Times operates as nothing more than a propaganda outlet, and they are trying to sell you narratives. Thus, it does not matter if what they deliver you is completely at odds with reality, they will still continue to volley bullshit into the news landscape. Here we see, prompting anger in only some rural communities. Some. Isn't that just something? Because if you were to actually look at the map provided by the UK government that is attached to that petition that we just looked at, which will be linked in the description down below for you to go check out if you have any desire to do so, well, what is it that we see when looking at that map? That it doesn't matter whether it is a rural or urban center, this is something that is being opposed in mass from people across quite literally every single district and county throughout the entirety of the United Kingdom. And when you look at that heat map, what do you realize? That it is the rural areas where this is being opposed in mass, even more so than the urban centers. But of course, that's not addressed, you see. The New York Times just comes to tell you that it's only in some rural communities. Absolutely and utterly bullshit at every single turn. Shocker. I know. Moving on now to close this out, we see thousands of farmers descend on Downing Street to protest against inheritance tax changes. And where is it that you think these farmers came from? That's right, it's all of those rural areas that the New York Times was claiming, well, you see, they weren't that activated. In fact, only some of them were truly angered by this. Which, like I've already said, if you simply look at the information at hand that is provided by the UK government, we can see that that is by all means a complete and total lie. I'm going to go ahead and call it there. Thank you for watching if you got this far. Thumbs up if you liked it, thumbs down if you didn't. Tell me where I'm wrong in the comment section down below. Stay lovely, stay great, and most importantly, my friends, tell someone you love them. Peace out.